I described earlier, um, a strategic plan that have been developed for the continent, and it has three pillars. One is the first pillar is really to ensure that we as a continent engage in clinical trials for vaccines on the continent. And there's a lot of expertise on the continent, I mean, in terms of human capital, in terms of sites that are used to conducting other vaccines like malaria, Ebola. And so there's no shortage of that on the continent. So that working group is co-chaired by Slim Karim from South Africa and Samba So from Mali. And that's the group that we meet every week to discuss developments in the areas of clinical trials and also to encourage, advocate, and enhance the ability for the continent to do that. The pillar number two is vaccine procurement and financing. And that group is really it's a mixed group of public health experts and the private sector and economic invoices that President Ramaphosa established. If you recall, as part of the coordinated effort, he did establish or appoint some economic invoices, and they're working with Africa CDC on regular basis to really look at ways that vaccines can be financed on the continent, including the Afri-Exim Bank. And then the third pillar that we are working on is really what we call preparedness and delivery. I mean, suppose a vaccine was available today in Johannesburg, how do you get that across the country in a speedy way? How do you get that to the right population, and who is the right population, and what do we really mean by fair allocation and equity in distribution? So that's the way the continent has organized itself through the African Union in preparation for a possible vaccine.
Earlier this month, Africa's biggest drug maker, Aspen Pharmacare, won a deal to make some of the COVID-19 vaccines that would be produced by Johnson & Johnson, should their vaccine be approved. Does this ease concerns that Africa would be at the back of the queue when it comes to a COVID-19 vaccine when one's finally approved?
So again, first of all, the leadership of the continent has been very engaged and has been upfront in expressing the concerns that Africa should not be at the queue in receiving a potential effective vaccines. And there are at least several mechanisms that the continent is exploring. I mean, you know of the COVAX facility, and many countries are working with that facility. We appreciate that. We also are working through the task force that President Ramaphosa put in place to look at alternative mechanisms from within the continent, i.e. from the Afri-Exim Bank to finance additional doses of vaccines. I mean, if you recall, the continent of Africa has been promised up to 20% of vaccines from the COVAX facility. We are saying as a continent that in order to get rid of this virus, we need to vaccinate up to 60% of our population to achieve herd immunity. So there's a gap there of about 40% that we need to cover. And how do we cover this? I mean, you know that the World Bank has put on the table $12 billion. And so we don't yet know exactly how much will come to the continent, but we expect that a substantial amount will come to the continent. We also are working with the Afri-Exim Bank, and they are saying that they are ready to leverage up to about $5 billion to procure additional doses of vaccines. So there are multiple avenues that are being explored now to make sure that Africa has the appropriate doses of vaccines, and also that we have that in a timely fashion, not in a delayed manner.
Has China made any overtures to African countries regarding vaccine manufacturing and supply? And if so, could you tell me which countries?
So China has been very committed in making the public statements with respect to a vaccine, any effective vaccine that is developed in China being a public good. I think we've taken note of that expression of really a statement of interest, showing that their interest and goodwill, as I would say, in making sure that vaccines, if they're available as a common good for humanity. Just yesterday, we were in discussion with the ambassador of China to the African Union, with respect to the possible partnerships that can be developed between China vaccine manufacturing companies and clinical trial sites in Africa. And you are probably aware that China is presently supporting two clinical trials in North Africa, in Egypt and in Morocco. I mean, our wish is that such trials be conducted as part of the continental strategy that I just discussed. And I think we remain hopeful that that message has been well received, and we look forward to more partners. I mean, it's not just China. I mean, the Russians have reached out to us, and we're saying, look, we are ready to work with you, but we really need to see clinical trials be done on the continent so that they address issues that you just raised, like with the background infections from other diseases impact the immunological responses of the vaccines. We just don't know. We've also been talking to the group at Oxford, and we will continue to engage with the group, the Johnson & Johnson and others that are doing trials in South Africa. So we have a very robust, expansive engagement strategy and approach to partners. I think we are not limiting ourselves to any particular partner. We are saying, as a continent of 1.2 billion, we are willing to work with any partner who adhere to our strategy plan for vaccine development and access in Africa.
I was just saying, so we are in a situation where Chinese and Russians, just as two examples, have offered supplies for when they're on markets, when the vaccine actually comes to market.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is that China has made repeatedly public statements that if the vaccines were available in China, they will make it a public good and for humanity. I think that is, we continue to encourage other manufacturers and other countries to make such commitments so that we can get rid of this virus everywhere and not just some in some part of the world. Because we all know that we are not going to be out of the wood as the world if COVID continues to be transmitted and spread in some parts of the world, because it's a virus that spreads extremely quickly and easily. So I think that has to be for everybody's interest on the planet that those who need to and want to be vaccinated are vaccinated.
Absolutely. Has the CDC actually been in touch with any of the Chinese companies or officials about supplying or manufacturing vaccines?
Yeah, one of the things that President Ramaphosa, again, as the chair of the African Union, is promoting is really local manufacturing. I think that is something that is also championed, a vision that is championed by a chairperson of the African Union Commission, His Excellency Moussa Faki Mohamed, where we're saying that we have to use this crisis to transform some health systems, important healthcare systems on the continent, like local manufacturing of diagnostics, local manufacturing of drugs, local manufacturing of vaccines. I think that is a vision that is shared, and we hope that we should be able to come out better in this pandemic than we went in with very limited manufacturing capacity.
And are there any groups that are helping with the financing for African countries to make sure that there's access, so that we don't end up, as you say, in a situation where richer countries buy them all up?
Yeah, as I indicated, I mean, you hope and expect that in the spirit of global solidarity that countries do not look inward, but we actually look at ways that everybody who needs a vaccine gets the vaccine, and not just some people getting the vaccine and others don't get the vaccine. So I think we must really applaud the efforts that are currently being conducted by the COVAX facility. That is a partnership between the Gavi, the Global Vaccine Alliance, the World Health Organization, and the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI. So that is a good example of global solidarity coming together, pooling our resources together to achieve a common goal that unites us. I think that is really important. I believe going forward, we should really make sure that the COVAX facility and mechanism becomes a model for resolving health security issues or concern when the need arises, so that we do not get ourselves again into scenarios where countries look inward and try to protect their citizens first before protecting others. Again, the virus has taught us a couple of things, and that we are more connected than we thought. So in other words, if you vaccinate yourself in country A and country B do not vaccinate, you are just a total waste of time. The virus has taught us that we are more vulnerable than we thought. I mean, regardless of whether you live in the global north or global south, you are very vulnerable. The virus has taught us that the huge inequities that exist across the board. I mean, it has further exposed those inequities, and I think we should really take note of those. And I think those are some fundamental lessons that have emerged, and we should learn from it. If you had to play this clock 2 years ago, you would have imagined the scenario differently. You would have imagined that the Africa, Southeast Asia will be most hit, and then the global north will be spared. But that's not what we are seeing. It tells us that we have to be humble enough and modest enough to understand, to say that, look, we don't yet know a lot about our planet. We don't yet know a lot about the microorganisms that surround us every day, and that the only way that we will be able to, in future, fight this pandemic is that we work collaboratively, we work cooperatively, and we work in a coordinated manner. That's the only way we are going to be able to have a chance to fight subsequent pandemics. This pandemic will be over. We are very sure with technology and science we'll be able to defeat it, but it doesn't exclude that another pandemic would occur, and we should really move into the future with a spirit of cooperation, collaboration, and coordination more than ever before.
That actually links really well into the next question I had, which was, even within the African continent, there are countries that have more resources to buy vaccines than other countries. As the African Union and Africa CDC, has there been really good cooperation amongst the African countries? And what does a roadmap for equitable distribution of COVID-19 vaccines look like across the African continent?
I think that Africa has shown, in my view, remarkable leadership and coordination in a manner that I've not seen in my over 3 decades of a public health career. I've never seen this. We at Africa CDC, we have had the opportunity to brief the head of states about 8 times at the Bureau of the Head of States. That is about 15 of them coming together under the leadership of the African Union chair to listen to presentations made on COVID-19 and strategies. That's remarkable progress. Africa, in the spirit of that cooperation and coordination, has established the COVID-19 fund. Okay, that is it continues to be supported and fed in. I think the Africa has established a platform called the African Medical Supply Platform, AMSP.Africa, where countries can go in there and then source for and procure commodities, what are called COVID response commodities. So that seems, we launched the PAC, the Partnership to Accelerate COVID-19 Testing, around May, that helped to really speed up testing of COVID. So those are remarkable initiatives that the African Union, Africa CDC, and with the coordination at the highest level of the continent has been able to push forward. Now, going forward with the vaccines, I think that is the same spirit that will carry this forward. We are saying that we have to use the whole of Africa approach, in discussing issues related to vaccines, fair allocation, equitable distribution. In the coming days, we will be having a meeting, a consultation across the entire continent to discuss issues related to what we really mean by fair allocation of vaccines, timely allocation of vaccines, equitable allocation of vaccines. What are the financial implications economic implications. And so it will be a meeting where ministers of health, ministers of finance, the private sector, the business people will be coming together so that we have a common conversation as part of the third pillar of our strategy. So the issues that you raise are pertinent, are fundamental, and we continue to build the right partnerships that will be required to resolve them. And no one for now knows all the answers.
You refer to this being, a very unique situation, and I think we globally would agree on that. But as a continent, Africa has also had other outbreaks that they've had to deal with, like Ebola. What lessons has Africa CDC been able to leverage in its response to this current pandemic?
We have leveraged several experiences. Several. One is the use of our community healthcare workers. We've deployed over 10,000 community healthcare workers. That is supporting countries there, which says that, we all know we don't have a vaccine. We don't have treatment for this virus. But we know that the centrality for the fight against COVID-19 or any disease outbreak is the ability to detect and to trace and to treat them. So, but you do this with the support of community healthcare workers, which is their foot soldiers. They go into the communities, they build trust, and then they find the cases and do the contact tracing there. I think that has been largely used across Africa, in South Africa, in Rwanda, in Ethiopia. And so that has been a huge, and those are lessons that we are learning from the HIV fights and the Ebola fights and others. And I think that is clearly very, very important. The ability to deploy responders, epidemiologists across the board is unique. When a few months ago, we recognized that some countries were in acute need of epidemiologists. Guess what we did? We worked with the Peace and Security Council of the African Union and engaged the government of Cameroon, and they put at our disposition a C-130 plane, which we took to DRC and took almost 30 responders to Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger and Cameroon. If you recall, at that time, the airspace was locked. It was the ability of the AU, the African Union, to negotiate airspace corridors for us to transport these responders to those countries. And they are still there in the field supporting these countries in their response. So a lot of lessons that we've learned, and again, we continue to learn. You remember, we are only close to 10 to 11 months in this pandemic, so there are still many more lessons that we need to learn and many more experiences that we can draw from our past ability to fight a disease outbreak on the continent.
Dr. Kinkazong, thank you. That's pretty much wrapping up our session, and I think some very pertinent questions that we've managed to touch on. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
Yes, I would like to really ask that, in partnership with you, your support, that we really continue to raise the message and appeal to the community, that is the citizens of Africa, that we have to take our own responsibilities in our hands and mask all the time. I see that as we move across the continent, people are masking less. And I think people are getting more and more expressing signs of prevention fatigue, and we should be very careful because we are seeing the number of infections increase slowly upward, and we don't want to get into the situation of where we see in Europe. And to avoid that, we just have to continue to be responsible and take our own personal initiative to protect ourselves and protect our loved ones.
Absolutely. And in your opinion, at this stage, we're not in a second wave in Africa?
Yeah, we are not yet at a second wave, but if the trends continue the way we are seeing, we will get a second wave.
In this next session, Bloomberg's West Africa Bureau Chief, Yinka Ibukun, spoke to Her Excellency Vera Davis de Souza, Minister of Finance for the Republic of Angola, and began by asking her when she expects Angola to return to growth and what she thinks the main drivers of that recovery will be.
We are struggling with a drop on our GDP for too long for our people, too long for our country, and we need also to manage all the consequences of the pandemic that make it extra challenging. But we are expecting in 2021 at least stop dropping. We will see a stagnation of our GDP. We have some international houses, even IMF, saying that we will grow as overall, but our expectation is to face a stagnation, but with the non-oil sector growing 2.1%. What is quite good in those circumstances. But we are anticipating that the oil sector will keep the trajectory of decreasing 6.2%. We are anticipating mainly because of the production performance. So the conjugation of these two performance will conduct us to a stagnation. But we understand that is an inflection point, and we will experiment our economy growing after that. We are counting on agriculture, fisheries, industry, also diamond mining as an overall, not only diamond sector, but mining as main drivers of the growth of the non-oil sector.
Thank you, Minister. Let's talk about debt. You said in September that Angola had plans to go to the international debt markets, but then the conditions were not ideal to do so. When do you see Angola selling Euro bonds again?
It's a tough question. We understand that we will be managed to go as soon as the market starts trusting again on our ability to serve our debt, our ability to increase our stock without main concerns. So this will come as soon as our economy show signs that we are not managing with a huge stress on liquidity, and we are also being able to manage the debt that we already have. 2021 will be an important year to test all this, because we believe that we will start seeing the results of our fiscal reform. We changed a lot during 2020 on our fiscal side. We start seeing the results of that on the VAT, on the real estate tax, on the income tax. So we will see the results of that, but also the results of the negotiation that we are having with our creditors. So it will start showing the results, and after that the market will show confidence. And when we understand that the confidence in us is restored, we will go back.
And Minister, you've spoken of negotiations with creditors. Has there been an agreement on deferring debt payments to China specifically?
Yes, we are negotiating with our main creditors. Regarding China, we got the benefits of the DSSI regarding one of the creditors. So in the same conditions that the other banks that are being part of the initiative of the DSSI, but we also negotiate with other two that with who we have commercial lines. As you know, the commercial part of the process was not under the initiative. So we also talk with those, and with those we arrange a framework that we understand that help us or give to us some breathing space and also fiscal space that we need to address issues related to health, but also related to capital expenditures that we need to boost the growth.
And for, again, China specifically, how much money are we talking about, and how much breathing space are you hoping to get? For how long do you expect to be deferred?
We hope to have breathing space for the next 3 years. Start counting since 2020, almost $6 billion of as the result of these negotiations. So it's a good figure. We understand that our challenges are bigger than that. That's why we need to keep working on our fiscal side, and also on the investments that are needed to make sure that our GDP growth. It's good to negotiate with creditors. It's good to have fiscal space, but we need to make sure that we can grow, and with that we can improve our ability to do even more for our population.
Okay. Fighting corruption has been a big pillar of this administration in a bid to plug leakages. Yet there seems to have been some resistance to audit the books of Sonangol, which has been directly or indirectly linked to corruption allegations. Could you speak to that, please?
No, not really, because Sonangol has an audit company that recently, 2009 books was recently published, and also the audit report was published with the books. So I think it's not an issue. Yes, we had some problems because of that. That report have some recommendations that Sonangol need to keep working on, that to remove those notes. But Sonangol has an audit company that look through the book and publish the report that results from the analysis from the financial reports of 2019 exercise.
Okay. There's also plans to privatize a lot of state-owned companies in Angola. Specifically, we're interested in Sonangol and Endiama. Could you speak a bit about your plans to sell stakes in those companies, and how much stakes you would be looking to sell?
Yes, our privatization program is quite ambitious. We have more than 195 assets and companies to sell. We already did it with 40. Most of them from the industry, small industries, some factories, and also farms. But we also have running process related to a insurance company, and also a commercial bank, public commercial bank. So we are doing a lot. We related to Sonangol, Endiama, and other big companies. We understand that we need, first of all, to make sure that they are ready to be interesting. We want to do a good sale. That's why the boards of those companies are working hard on a process of, we call it regeneration, we can call it restructuring the company to make sure that they are ready to go, for example, through the market in a process more open than possible. An IPO, why not? So that's a lot to do before that. We are targeting end of 2021, beginning of 2022 to start the process of privatization of the big ones, such as Sonangol and Ndiama. But all this will depend on how fast we can reorganize those companies to make sure that with a due diligence process, we can capture the interest of high quality investors. That's what we want for those companies.
Okay. There's also recently been protests in Angola, young people taking to the streets to express their anger at rising unemployment and an increase in the cost of living. What's your message to young Angolans?
A message of patience and hope. We are totally aware that it's not an easy moment, because we were dealing with a very fragile economy when we were hit by the coronavirus and the decrease on the drop on the oil price. On top of that, we are working on economic and financial reforms, making our exchange rate flexible in a free float regime, in an economy that we import a lot of what we are eating. So all this combined is quite hard to manage for our population, but we really understand that we have the right vision, that we want to start growing in a more sustainable way, where the private sector, where the self-sustainability of production are key pillars of our growth. So we are in a moment where the effects of our reformist agenda are not, the people are not feeling, but we need to keep moving, because it's the only way to assure that we will not live a scenario like this again. So vulnerable to external shocks. We need to avoid this to happen again. So yes, we still committed. We ask patience to our population. We ask patience to our young people, and also help for make with us this new Angola, exploring the new ideas, exploring the dynamic and the strength that our people have, surviving from so many problems and so many challenges. And we believe that together, with openness, with dialogue, we will win this battle.
Our next session focuses on Africa's debt. And for that, I hand it over to my colleague, Nigeria correspondent Alonso Soto.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Alonso Soto, Bloomberg News correspondent in Nigeria, currently working out of Madrid. Many thanks for joining us to talk about African debt at this very crucial moment. Just over a week ago, Zambia became the first African country to default on its external debt since the onset of the coronavirus pandemic. That has raised fears of a new debt crisis in the continent. Africa has experienced what could be its worst recession in decades. Revenues and international reserves are falling, while the risk of default increases. To talk more about the debt outlook in the continent, we have today a longtime investor in frontier and emerging markets, Kevin Daly, Investment Director at Aberdeen Standard Investments. I'll go right ahead with the questions for you, Kevin. Over the weekend, the G20 leaders expressed support for the debt relief initiative. They agreed on a common strategy to rework the debt for those suffering the most. Some critics say that initiative is doomed to fail without private sector participation. Kevin, I wanted to ask you, how do you respond to that criticism? And is the private sector not doing its part?
Well, I think, the issue of the private sector not doing its part has been overplayed by the official sector, by the G20. And by that, I mean, when they initially rolled out DSSI back in April, as we know, private sector involvement, or PSI, as it's commonly referred to, was voluntary. Now, investors are not necessarily going to be the first in the queue to volunteer to defer interest payments. We've always said that request had to come from the issuers, and we would go through a formal process where we would sit down with the issuers and discuss to what extent they needed debt relief. Now, again, since then, the DSSI was rolled out. We've heard numerous criticisms and comments from the likes of David Malpass, the president of the World Bank, and others in the G20 about their frustration over the lack of PSI. But, what we've said is we have been working behind the scenes with, again, official sector, discussing with the IMF, the World Bank, with the issuers, most importantly, about coming up with some financing options to provide a cheaper form of financing. Because what we've encountered, obviously, during this pandemic is a liquidity crisis, which we as investors and the issuers, most importantly, are trying to avoid this turning into a solvency crisis. So liquidity relief, which we've seen across the world for developed markets and some more developed EM countries, unfortunately has been lacking in the case of the low-income countries. Now, the IMF and the World Bank did provide emergency relief and support, but as we all know, in order to develop and grow, these countries are going to be in need of private sector capital. And this goes back to the heart of, if you were trying to drag the private sector into this debt relief initiative where you were going to provide coupon relief, you would have an unknown or potentially extended period of time where these countries could have lost access to private market capital. So that was really the debate that we were trying to discuss, issues we were trying to discuss behind the scenes with all of the various stakeholders. So I think the claim or the criticism that we have not been involved in this initiative, I think is somewhat, as they say, I think it's been overplayed.
I see, Kevin, we're talking about the different stakeholders in here. You hold Zambian debt, dollar-denominated debt. Investors there have complained that Chinese lenders, some of these banks, are behind the debt problems of the country and are not being transparent in renegotiations. With the new G20 common framework, do you expect China to open up to facilitate restructuring?
Well, I think the new G20 common framework is clearly an attempt to get the Chinese to the table. As we're aware, during the DSSI initiative, the Chinese were a unwilling participant. They have been participating to some degree, depending on the country. But I think there was frustration amongst the Paris Club, amongst the official sector, multilaterals, of the unwillingness or the difficulties for countries to renegotiate or defer these interest payments, principal payments with their Chinese lenders. So the common framework makes this a much more formal process going forward. And it is really the new template, shall we say, post DSSI, because DSSI has been extended for 6 months. But if you look at the number of countries which have participated in DSSI, it's nowhere near the level of participation that the official sector had probably expected. I think you've got about 77 eligible countries, and last count I heard there were about 44 who agreed to DSSI. So the common framework, is a new template going forward. It will be getting the Chinese to the table on a more formal process. Now, bringing Zambia into this discussion, I think, is quite interesting because, as we know, Zambia is already in the midst of the restructuring, which was commenced. Well, they announced it earlier this year, their intention to do this. They sought a consensus solicitation, which was launched on September the 22nd. unfortunately, there was no signaling at all from the Zambians or Lazard of their intentions. And, this got off to a bad step on day one. We as creditors amongst the credit committee are under no illusions that Zambia needs a debt restructuring. We're all aware that they need it in order to put the debt back on a sustainable level. But there are a number of measures and steps that the Zambians have to undertake to ensure that not only a successful debt restructuring, but that the debt is sustainable going forward. And we have pointed out to the government, to their advisors, Lazard, that we as creditors, the last time we lent money to Zambia was in 2015, when the debt was viewed as sustainable. There was no issues. Their IMF DSA was not viewed as unsustainable. But the excessive borrowing from the Chinese lenders over the last 4 or 5 years has really pushed this country over the edge. So for us as creditors to agree to this consent, we need to get strong assurances from the government that they are going to get the similar consent on all of their Chinese loans. And on top of that, we need the government to come up with a medium-term fiscal framework plan, which will ensure debt sustainability. On an ideal world, we'd love them to get an IMF program like we saw with Ecuador, which was a key part of that success in restructuring their debt earlier this year. Also with the Zambians, they probably will need to rethink their borrowing plans going forward, because they've come out with a plan that states that they're going to be borrowing somewhere in the region of 700 million per annum over the next 3 years. Zambia should be getting, if this money is essential projects, which they claim it is, again, you need some accountability on those projects, the cost. But they should be getting concessional financing for these projects, and that will require getting an IMF program. So, there's a lot of steps and measures that the Zambians have to undertake to ensure that this will be a successful restructuring. It's early days, but I think by them trying to get us to agree, us as Eurobond creditors first to all these measures, I think the sequencing is extremely important. I think it's something we need to see a lot more steps on their behalf before we're comfortable providing that consent solicitation.
Now, Kevin, to continue with Zambia, what is the next step in here? Are you guys in contact with the Zambian government? And also, do you think it will be helpful if these guys apply for the common framework treatment of the G20?
Well, the next step is the government and our advisors, new state partners, are in the process of agreeing to an NDA, which will hopefully provide some important information that we're seeking. Now, we as investors don't want to receive any material non-public information at this stage. So the NDA will just be an agreement between our advisors and the Zambians and their advisors, Lazard. Now, if it turns out that there is an NPI in this agreement that is essential and important for us as creditors to reach a decision on the consent, we will then be asked ourselves as investors to sign an NDA. But again, all the information I was stating earlier about the Chinese debt, about the medium-term fiscal framework, about their borrowing plans and detailed breakdown of these projects. This is all the kind of information, standard information, that we will require as creditors to make an informed decision whether or not to provide this consent period. So it is a step in the right direction, shall we say, after the missed coupon payment following the 30-day grace period on the 14th of November. And now we need to see how willing are the Zambians are going to be in terms of providing all this information for us as creditors. So moving in the right direction, I think, is at least a positive sign, but we still have a long way to go. The second part, the common framework, again, it's uncertain whether Zambia is, quote unquote, going to be following the steps of the common framework. Because as we know, first of all, the debtor country has to request debt relief, which in the case of Zambia are doing. They have to request an IMF, World Bank, assistance to some degree, to come up with they'll need a new debt sustainability analysis. The IMF, World Bank will then, with their bilateral partners, will then come up with what debt levels and what fiscal measures are necessary to ensure debt sustainability going forward. So, if that's the case here in Zambia, well, these are, hopefully these are signals or measures which will push them in the direction of getting an IMF program. Because I think, we as investors would like to see that. It would provide a necessary fiscal anchor for the country. And more importantly, it would provide the opportunity for Zambia to get concessional lending, concessional loans, which will be much cheaper, and also will have accountability compared to the more expensive Chinese loans, which have zero accountability or transparency. And that's something, as we have stated as creditors, it's been this excessive borrowing over the last 4 or 5 years, which has pushed this country over the edge. It hasn't been lending by Eurobond creditors.
Let me continue with the G20 in here. I'm wondering what you see in terms of the upcoming U.S. administration with the victory of Joe Biden. Could that new administration change this global debt relief effort, and how? How do you see that changing?
It is certainly possible. I've had an interesting discussion with a high-ranking U.S. Treasury official who, at the end of our discussion, said, things could get tougher under a Biden administration. And I think by that, obviously, he meant that the approach that they may take compared to this current administration would be drawing a much more stronger line under official sector relief for these countries, which would require a much more, much larger, shall we say, and stronger effort to restructure their private sector debt. So we don't know that at this stage because we haven't had any signals yet. But I think if you read into papers like the Group of 30 have published, which there's a number of officials in that group, which could be one way or another involved or influencing the new administration, then yes, I think we as creditors have to be aware that countries could be forced to encounter or certainly restructure their private sector debt. Now, this sort of case-by-case basis, which is highlighted in the Common Framework, again, is highlighted in the Group of 30 paper that was published back in October. So, that will be the way going forward, because the one-size-fits-all approach, which was in the DSSI initiative, clearly that was not going to work because you would have been, to some degree, enforcing it or pushing it, recommending it to countries that didn't have a solvency problem. They may be encountering liquidity problems, as we're aware, but what you didn't want to do was push all of these countries into a situation where it would have a big impact on their ability and the cost of borrowing private sector capital. And we saw this back in April where, you saw, well over 10 countries, probably about 12 countries that had distressed debt levels, which, spreads of over 1,000 basis points. And today we're looking at probably 4 or 5. So the market is moved away from the concerns that we saw back in, April, May. But I think, again, going forward under a Biden administration, you have, that has to be, as an investor, that has to be your base case that they will be drawing a tougher line on countries that are looking to tap into official sector and multilateral debt support that they'll have to seek PSI.
And Kevin, we have a couple of minutes. I just wanted to ask you, looking forward, you talked about the fall in yields for some of these countries. When do you see sub-Saharan African sovereigns issuing debt in international markets again? When do you think that could happen?
It could happen as soon as this week, because we saw Ivory Coast just announced a liability management, which is a buyback of several of their outstanding bonds, and then they're looking to issue a new, I believe it's a 10 or 11-year issue in euros, which makes sense for Ivory Coast. In recent years, you've seen both Ivory Coast and Senegal, which are part of the West African Monetary Union, issuing euro-denominated bonds as opposed to dollar issues. So this will be the first one. I think, given where both Ivory Coast and Senegal, which are widely viewed as the low beta credits in the region, their borrowing levels should be fairly moderate, nothing excessive. But if you look at the rest of the region as well, there's no reason why you couldn't see Nigeria, Kenya, even Ghana borrowing at these current levels where we're seeing spreads and yields. One thing to add on that, I was on a call last week with the Nigerian DMO, and she had asked about market access, and I said, well, my recommendation to you is you should do two things. One, you should be buying back some of your shorter dated instruments and maybe looking to issue somewhere in the 15-year sector because there is a gap there in the curve. So I think the liability management exercise, in addition to new money, makes sense for the sub-Saharan Africa countries that can access the market in current conditions. So yes, the short answer is there's a number of countries we believe have regained market access.
Well, Kevin, that's all the time that we have. I want to thank you again, Kevin Daly from Aberdeen, for talking to us today. The discussion really highlights the challenges and complexity of the debt situation in Africa with a new landscape of creditors and a gloomy global outlook. And with that, now it's back to you, Malika.
Next up, a conversation on the future of Kenya between Bloomberg's East Africa Bureau Chief David Malinga and Honorable Ambassador Ukur Yatani, Kenya's Cabinet Secretary for the National Treasury and Planning.
Secretary Yatani, welcome. And to start off, could you please take us through how the Kenyan economy has been responding and to the pandemic and what the outlook is for the rest of the year and probably next year?
Let me take this opportunity to thank you very much for according us an opportunity to interact with you. This is a very important forum given that the sensitivity of performance of most economies. Prior to the onset of COVID, as a country, we've decided to embark on major stimulus areas of growth, and by making sure that we do appropriate investment on those basic life requirements, including housing, food security, universal healthcare, among others, manufacturing, among others. We were expecting this to trigger, stimulus to the economy. But then around March, April, then we were hit by COVID. Not only in Kenya, but in the entire globe. And those assumptions had to change. We had to take on a different, economic trajectory, by making sure that, we do not suffer irreparable damage to the economy by ensuring that the economy remains liquid, at the same time by making sure that we cushion businesses from closing down. In addition, then, we were also looking at how best we can give social support to the vulnerable segment of the society, mainly the urban poor, mainly the urban workers who are with a lot of energy, but as a result of the slowed economy, they are likely to lose jobs, they are likely to lose income, they are likely to lose, livelihood. And that's why we decided to take on this cause. But maybe down the line, then how did we perform? Prior to the onset of COVID, as an economy, we have also taken as a government, we have taken a conscious step by ensuring that we also embark on a fiscal consolidation process by working hard to grow our revenue, rationalizing, carrying out austerity measures in some of those expenditures that we thought can actually be either suspended or, we reduce on the uptake. These are expenditures on travels, training, publicity, things that we thought can actually save resources for government, so that now we embark on a development trajectory. These are the assumptions that we are working on. Then, as a result of COVID, this had to change. It takes a lot of normal situation had to change, and we encountered and made sure that we did a number of investments by carrying out a stimulus package. Even before then, we had to push on the economy by carrying out a fiscal policy measures, reducing on the value-added tax from 16% to 14%. At the same time, also reducing on corporate tax, general pay as you earn from 30% down to 25%. In addition to other interventions, we were able through this to give increased disposable income to the people by maintaining consumption and also by maintaining the market as a result of the local industry. Additionally, we also came up with reforms in the monetary sector by reducing on interest rate between banks. At the same time, also with reducing on the cash ratio, so that resources can now be transferred to the commercial banks for annual lending. But then now, if we look at it, how we performed, having done that kind of intervention, including even a stimulus package, where we set aside resources in critical areas to ensure we create employment and sustain people employment. When we now carried out our, like all countries and in various degrees, our economy contracted by 5.7% in the second quarter. That is April, May, June. And that is the time when the climax of the challenge as a result of the need for various adjustments to the economy and the business, of the day. But this contraction of 5.7, we were at about 4.9 in first quarter. We were actually on a good trajectory, but then with a shock, the economy contracted, by 5.7. The main areas of challenge was in the hospitality industry, in the hotel industry, in travel, was most affected.
And what does it say to the outlook, Secretary Yatani? I mean, at the end of the year, shall we say that the economy will actually contract for the first time in a long time, or will it be flat growth, as you had earlier anticipated?
Yeah. But I think before I answer you, that the most important thing is that, have you looked at the vital signs of the economy, a number of parameters were still healthy, including, registering an inflation of 4.8%, which was actually down from 5% in October last year. We were also able to look at, the interest, there's lower interest rate of 6.5% and interbank rate of 2.7%. There's also competitive. If you look at it, our exchange rate last year in October, we had about 3.7%, but there's been adjustment of up to 108. We think this is fairly stable under the current circumstance. So in essence, to answer your question, is that definitely there's going to be a significant reduction, but the growth of the economy will still be positive at about 0.6%, rather than the negative that was initially projected. But undoubtedly, it's clear that we have had significant revenue shortfall and also pressure on expenditure as a result of the taxes that we had foregone. So those are areas which are quite clear. The interventions that we undertook in the first intervention on the fiscal and monetary and social policy measures, but number two, and significantly, we also came up with an economic stimulus program projected over the entire fiscal year. But this wasn't just to create jobs, opportunities, and also working on the SMEs, create liquidity, and then thirdly, we are also towards the tail end of launching a post-COVID-19 economic recovery projected over 3 years with a number of interventions that we looked at. But at the moment now, we realize that given the expenditure pressure, we are now in the process of reversing some of those policy measures by going back to the VAT from 14% back to 16%, and at the same time also, in the corporate and the pay as you earn, we now move from 25% to 30%, because that gap in the revenue, we have to fill it, and we've noted that the economy is now, the business entities are now recovering, and they have now done the necessary adjustment, and we think this is something that can be managed. The amount that we've, in terms of liquidity, we had to plow back to the economy. I mean to the bank, about 35 billion Kenya shilling, while at the same time the stimulus package were costing us about 58 billion Kenya shilling. And the aim of the stimulus package was to create jobs for the youth, and mainly then support the SMEs, and more importantly, enhancing liquidity of businesses. And the post-COVID,
we've seen you've actually had such an elaborate stimulus plan since the pandemic started, and the president also laid it out really clearly. And Kenya is really one of the most important economies in sub-Saharan Africa, and investors are closely watching these economies, and particularly on debt. Which brings me to my next question. So we understand that the government made a decision to participate in the G20 debt initiative. Could you kindly explain to us what kind of assurances you got to change to, and decide to now participate in this initiative?
Yeah, thank you very much. Let me also first correct the impression that it is still, the DSSI is still under consideration, under, intense discussion within government, because we realize that initially, we've been quite hesitant given the conditions. We are also private holders. I mean, we have private creditors, and we've been expecting some arrangements where they'll also be brought on board. And we realized also based on our, the mix of our debt and the amount that we are going to benefit might not be very significant, and it's going to maybe place challenges on us at the time that they pay. The payment had actually been scheduled on that particular time. We think there's going to be a bit of pressure on that. Now, having said this, it's still a matter of the discussions. We have not yet made any formal application to join this arrangement. We're still studying the effect that's going to have on the economy, and weighing between the gains and the possible strain that's going to have on the economy. So it's a matter that is still under consideration. We have not fully made up our mind. We think it's something that can be explored, and we are going to make this decision in the course of time based on our own domestic situation. It's a very important initiative, but there's still the constraining conditions are not giving us that comfort. But it's a matter that we are still seriously considering.
So two questions on that. In case you're to participate, how much will you be looking to conserve? And then will you be only participating in the DSSI as and when you make that decision, or will you actually also be looking to renegotiate Kenya's external debt under the comprehensive framework for the long term?
At the moment, just to answer your first question, that the amount you are looking at is equivalent to about 70 to 75 billion Kenyan shilling. It's quite modest. It's not going to be really give us a lot of break, given actually the attendant conditions, which may constrain us in very many ways. I think that is the first position. We have no intention at the moment to renegotiate, any debts at the moment, because Kenya, as a sovereign nation, we are quite particular about the level of exposure. At the moment, I think we are now looking at other alternatives by cutting on a number of expenditures to fit within the fiscal framework, rather than negotiate.
And in terms of treating other bilateral and multilateral creditors, specifically on China, which is one of Kenya's main bilateral lenders, have you talked to China as well, and have they responded to your requests for any form of debt relief?
Let me foremost let me correct an impression that the debts you owe is only to China. We have debts to a number of bilateral partners, and we treat them equally. Okay? China is not exception, and we have not made any formal engagement to either reschedule debt or to negotiate on any matter. Because at the moment, we are quite really not, I'll not say, we are fairly on, a very balanced debt situation, because we give it as a first priority, and we give it because those obligations, we really do not want to create an impression that we are strained in any way. But I indicated to you that, of course, like most countries, we have challenges of revenue performance. We want to now adjust to this by postponing some of the development initiatives and also cutting significantly on recurrent to make sure that we are fully on course and we have the capacity to arrange a fiscal framework.
Thank you for clearing that. lastly, let me ask you about the IMF. The mission concluded, IMF concluded a mission with you in Kenya on Friday, and they talked about discussing a 3.5-year fund program with you. From your part as Kenya, what are you seeking? How much would you be looking to get from the IMF when this issue comes to the board early next year?
It's true that we've been in discussion with IMF since August 2020 for a possible 3-year extended fund facility to disbursing program to Kenya. And the program type is mainly on, extended fund facility for 3.5 years, looking at about 3.5 years. We expect to access up to 305% of our quota. It's about USD 2.3 billion, with a provision of disbursement of up to US dollar 725 million in this financial year, our financial year up to end of June. So these are things we are looking at. And the program objectives are very clear. We are looking at, continuous support to Kenya's COVID-19 response. We're also looking at areas of reduced debt vulnerabilities through a revenue-driven fiscal consolidation that foremost also takes into consideration that, the advance that will go into advance the structural reforms and governance agenda of a number of SOEs.
Honorable Ambassador Yatani, thank you so much. That is the time we had, and thank you so much. Our greetings to all Nairobians and Kenyans. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure engaging you.
Companies fought back against pandemic lockdowns by fitting 2 years' worth of digital transformation into just 2 months. Bloomberg's Tope Alake spoke with Google's Sub-Saharan Africa Director Nitin Gajria and WebFontaine's founder and trade and technology investor Jean Goldbeck Korunlian, and she started by asking Google's Nitin Gajria about the strangest digitization trend he's seen this year.
Thanks for having me. I'm not sure I'd start with the strangest thing, but one of the most wonderful things I've seen in the course of this pandemic is just the opportunity that this very dire situation presents us in Africa to really start making significant leaps forward in terms of usage of technology and how we use technology to solve problems. We've seen this in terms of I think there's been a fundamental shift in the relationship of the average African user with digital technology. There's been a fundamental shift in the relationship between a user and access to data. And we'll continue to see more and more innovation coming out of that. We've seen more investment in data infrastructure than we have seen in the past several years, just over the course of the last year or so. So there have been some really positive movements from what is and continues to be a very, very dire situation.
So are you able to talk specifically about the sector, maybe digital sector, that you've seen investments during this period?
Yeah, sure. I can talk to a couple of things that Google's working on, and just in the course of the last few months, we've launched a partnership with Telecom in Kenya, just as an example, where we're putting balloons in the stratosphere, which are able to get internet out to remote parts with low population densities. And what that helps us do is it helps us overcome the cost associated with setting up physical infrastructure, like setting up a cell phone tower in low population areas. Another example of that is something a little bit more recent, where we've launched a partnership with Liquid Telecom to expand the use of a new technology that transmits data by the use of infrared light. So I think there's more and more innovative delivery mechanisms that are coming into play. Another area that we've seen some innovation in is how do we get access to devices to more and more people, right? Without devices, having data is pretty pointless. Now, even the cheapest smartphones are still pretty expensive for a lot of people all over the continent. And one of the things that we're playing around with is how do we get access to cheaper smartphones to more people? And in that, we have a partnership with Safaricom, again in Kenya, where we're able to get devices being sold on an installment basis, which again makes it a lot more accessible for people to get their hands on a device and then data.
So when you talk about the partnership with Safaricom, for instance, so can you talk more a bit on that, on the kind of phones, what the features on the phones, and the value of the partnership? How is it really working out?
So again, the objective really is how do we get more devices into more hands, and as a result of that, more access to data for more people, right? I fundamentally believe that the internet has a transformative impact on the lives of people. It has the power to change many things for the better, right? And with that in mind, we've sort of gotten into this partnership using our Android platform together with Safaricom to give more people access to cheaper devices, and these are high-quality devices. These are cheaper devices, access to data, and with that comes a lot of power.
So when did you start this partnership, and how long is it going to be for?
So we've launched the partnership with Safaricom a couple of months ago now, and we continue to work on what the next phase of this partnership will be, and so on. So the intention, the common aspect in this between Safaricom and us is really the intention to get more data and more devices into more hands.
Okay, so just before I move on to Jean, I would like you to talk more about the project Loon, which you started a few years ago. So are you looking to launch, roll out more loans in other African countries apart from what you've done in Kenya and Mozambique?
Yeah, look, we're constantly exploring different opportunities, and we're talking to partners constantly about getting this technology into more parts of Africa. Don't have anything to announce in the immediate term, but we're constantly having those conversations and seeing where it makes sense for us together with partners to bring this technology to more people.
Okay, so let's shift the conversation a little bit into what has happened in terms of trade flow and commerce. So Jean, given that this is like the specialty of Webfontaine, are you able to tell us what you've seen over the past few months that has changed in terms of trade and commerce in Africa? So, and what do you see changing again into the next year?
It's been a very interesting period for Africa. Things have been totally unexpected. We have seen things that we never believed would happen. We expected, for instance, in these countries, customs revenue to melt down completely. I mean, shipping, after all, was almost 40% down, I think. And I'd like to give you the example of Nigeria. You're in Nigeria now, so that may be interesting for you. In Nigeria has adopted recently a new custom system, which is largely based on artificial intelligence. The system replaced the antiquated Asikuda, and it's giving amazing results. These people that were using it were expecting that basically they would probably lose 30 or 40% of custom revenue. In fact, during this period, custom revenue increased. It increased for a number of reasons. One thing which we think is the reason why it increased is that we have installed system with artificial intelligence. We have smart fraud detection, a system that is machine learning. That is, every time it has new data, it improves itself. And the result of this is just incredible. I mean, we have seen in Nigeria during this period, not only that the revenue did not go down, but they went up. Nigeria has been beating all records during this period with probably 30 or 40% shipping, 30 or 40% down. They increased their results from the past years. And in terms of their expectation, the government set some targets for the customs for revenue. Their revenue has been exceeded by 50%, 50% higher than their target. This is amazing. And it's largely due to technology. So what we see now is the interest of a large number of countries that like to use the same kind of systems in order to have the same kind of results. We've seen also in Benin Benin has a single window system. You put all the services to trade together in a single system. It's around the Esikuda system, and there was no payment system in the e-payment system in Benin. And when COVID started, the government started putting a lot of pressure on our engineers, get it done. And our engineers worked day and night to get it done. And it's working today. You have mobile money, you have automated transfer from banks for all participants. And it's, again, has been very positive for COVID. It's something that may not have happened, at least not have happened that quickly without the COVID.
Okay, so yeah. So are you working with other African countries, to develop solutions to upgrade their trade systems, apart from Nigeria and Benin?
Yes, we're certainly working with a number of countries. I would say that we have something in most of the countries in Africa, sometimes very small things, but we have something. But as I said, we have been contacted by at least 15 countries recently after the results they have seen in other countries in order to see how they could also benefit from what has been from artificial intelligence.
So now let's talk about equality and infrastructure. So I'm directing this question to Nathan. Now we have just about 40% of African population connected to internet, and we are expecting a youthful population boom. So how does the lack of digital architecture in the continent and the challenges you face either pose a risk or opportunity, or both, for Google?
Let's start with the good news. The good news is that we have, you referred to the demographic dividend. We have the largest pool of young people in the world, and that will continue for the foreseeable future, right? So that is an incredibly positive bit of news that we should sort of hold on to dearly. Now, what that does is, what having a very youthful population does is, it means that over the next several years, we will have more and more people in the economy producing value. They will be creating value in all sorts of different ways. They'll be consuming more. So that sort of bodes really, really well for the future. Now, but going back to your question on digital infrastructure, I think, yes, we have some opportunities as far as digital infrastructure is concerned. Yes, we have opportunities to get more data into more hands. We have opportunities to get more devices into more hands. But there is plenty of reason to feel very optimistic about these things. There are plenty of innovative solutions, just like the couple of solutions I mentioned earlier around Loon or around the project the Project Tara, which is something that we're doing together with Liquid Telecom. These are some innovative delivery mechanisms to really get data, and I talked about the partnership with Safaricom to get devices into more hands. But beyond that, there is a growing entrepreneurial ecosystem on the continent that is something, again, to feel really, really optimistic about. So if you look at the startup ecosystem on the continent, we're seeing a tremendous amount of progress there. We've seen twice the amount of venture capital flow into the startup ecosystem in 2019 as it did the previous year. And we're waiting on 2020 numbers to see what kind of impact COVID has had on venture capital. We're seeing, we now know that we have about 700,000 active professional developers on the continent, and we know that this number is growing. We know where these developers are, and we know what kind of work these developers are doing. So it gives the private sector as well as policymakers a really good hold on information on how to continue to nurture an innovation ecosystem. How do you continue to foster innovation? How do you continue to help entrepreneurs, developers, and investors grow in the region?
Okay, so are you able to talk about the countries that you are focused on right now in Africa?
Well, we've got to look at instead of sort of thinking about focus countries, we've got to look at the 1.3 billion population base. In fact, rather than think about national boundaries, how do we think about cross-border? How do we think about cross-border solutions? How do we think about African Union? How do we think about the the free trade agreement that we have in place, and how can we use frameworks like the free trade agreement presents us with to drive more harmonization in various regulations and various laws, which again makes trade much easier, it makes innovation much easier, it creates a fertile ground for entrepreneurs, it creates a fertile ground for investors to come in, and so on. So it's really important that we start to think about how we drive more harmony than how we think about sort of specific geographies.
Okay, so before I go on, I would like you to talk about how, because you mentioned, creating an enabling environment to empower the youth to sort of, increase the infrastructure on ground. So are you able to tell us whether the Google Pixel, because I know this is something that is really popular in other advanced markets, is this something that you are really looking to maybe bring more into Africa to compete with the likes of Samsung and iPhone and other phone brands that are really popular in the continent?
I think the need of the hour is really how do we get the 800 million people that are not on the internet today, that have never accessed the internet, how do we get them online, right? So, and what's the role that companies like Google, but not just Google, but what's the role that policymakers have to play? What is the role that the broader private sector has to play in bringing the next 800 million people online? And if down the road we see the Pixel or any other innovation as an important ingredient in making that happen, then yes, we would we would go down that path. But I think it's important to be driven more by the mission of how do we get access to the internet to more and more people all over the continent.
Okay, so now going back to Jen, can you tell us, we know that data is a major issue in sub-Saharan Africa. So is Webfontaine maybe developing solutions to help some of these countries to improve in this regard? Are you maybe in talks with some governments and, just to let us know?
Yes, well, there is, of course, an enormous amount of data that is generated everywhere, but also in Africa. Of course, Google is much better placed than we are to look at these data. But we are in the field of trade, and we are processing a large amount of the trade data that is extremely interesting data, but we are respecting the ownership of these data, which we consider belong to the government. Now, these data one day will be used. It's likely that all the systems of customs one day will be linked to one another, that there will be a need for platforms. And we're certainly prepared to discuss ways of creating these platforms to centralize the data of Africa and eventually see if these data can be monetized, how the revenue generated by these data can be shared with the government and those who generate them. It's a completely different model than the ones you have today in other countries. But I think this will come, and we have started discussing, certainly, with countries.
Okay. So going back to Google and the investments you've made so far in Africa. So Nitin, can you tell us, in terms of the undersea cable that you are building to connect Africa, are you able to tell us how Project Loon is coming along and, the cable project, where is it at the moment and how much investment have you put into building this cable?
Sure thing. For those who are not familiar, we've announced a subsea cable that we're laying between Lisbon in Portugal all the way down to Cape Town, South Africa, along the west coast of the continent, with a couple of landing points in Accra and Lagos, and we might sort of look at further landing points down the road. I think we're still maybe about a year and a half, 2 years away from this being up and running. Obviously, sort of it's no mean undertaking to lay a physical cable all the way from Lisbon to Cape Town. But we're really excited about what the possibilities that this opens up for the continent. This substantially increases the capacity of data into the continent and opens up incredible opportunities. What's important though is it's not just about laying the subsea cable and all our problems are solved, but it's about then making sure that we are creating the right partnerships for last mile connectivity. It's important to make sure that we are creating the conditions for more people to have access to devices so that they can access data. It's important that we drive the right amount of education with with the average person in terms of basic digital skills. How do I make the most of the internet for my small business that I might be running in a particular small town in Nigeria, for example, right? So it's important that the entire ecosystem is sort of being built in harmony versus sort of really seeing this one cable as a golden or silver bullet of some sort.
So building on that, do you have any data centers in Africa?
No, at this point we don't have any physical data centers in Africa, and increasingly as the way sort of if you look at the direction that technology is traveling in cloud computing, the need to have massive data centers in every single part of the world is diffused. So, but no, to answer your question, no, we don't have any data centers in Africa at the moment.
I just wanted to mention an initiative that we will have in Africa. We're going to create a research and development center in Africa that is with Africans. And this is probably a new initiative. There's a shortage of qualified personnel, at least in that field. So what we're going to do is create a boot camp, and we're going to select Africans. We will finance their stay with us for 6 months. And a boot camp is something difficult. You know, you get an exam every 2 weeks, and if you're not good, you're just out. But I think it's important. It's important for Africa. It's going to be something that's going to create new talents in Africa. And I don't know whether we'll find from the African universities enough people, but we may even be able to make people that have studied abroad come back to Africa. If they finish the bootcamp course, then they will have a good job immediately after, either with Web Fontaine or we'll help them to get it elsewhere.
So will it be free, or they have to pay to get it?
No, we'll select the people that they will not have to pay for it. We will select the people, that is, we want to have.
How long is it going to run for?
It's going to run for 6 months. Those who have already IT experience may just do the last 3 months. But these boot camps are hard work.
Are you able to tell us how you are tapping the talent in the continent? Because I know that for most companies, it's really difficult to find the right people. So how are you tapping into this in Web Fontaine? And how do you plan to expand to the next level in the continent?
Yes. First of all, there are talents in Africa. So Web Fontaine has more or less 90 or more over 90% of its staff in Africa that are Africans. Web Fontaine has also, out of 7 offices, 6 of the managing directors are Africans. And moreover, as from January 1st, Web Fontaine has designated a new chief executive officer. He's an African from Senegal. His name is Alioune Ciss. And you will see that he will take this company to much higher levels. And he's not just the CEO for Africa, he's the CEO for the global company. This is important. So you find talents in Africa.
Yeah, so we have to round up now. Just before we go, I would like Nitin to talk about, the future of Google in Africa. What are the things you really want to, go into briefly, just before we go?
Yeah, look, in 30 seconds, like I said before, our objective is how do we get more people onto the internet? The internet has a transformative power. It has the ability to change things for the better quite dramatically and quite quickly. So what we're thinking about is how do we help more people get onto the internet? How do we help more people make the most out of the internet in their own lives? So that's really how we're looking at our mission on the continent.
Thank you so much for joining us today. It's really good to have you both on this panel. Thank you.
It seems we're having some technical difficulties, and we do apologize for that. We'll take a short break and reconvene at 3 p.m. Central Africa time with our next segment of Invest Africa. So please go back to our agenda page and click on Capital Markets Focus South Africa to join our next session with my colleague Manus Cranny, co-anchor of Bloomberg Daybreak Middle East, who will host the next hour of Invest Africa. We'll see you there shortly. And once again, thank you for joining us.